guys, welcome back to the Sidecast. Hope you enjoy my new background. I'm just trying something new out. So today's case I have for you is the case of the Cassidy family murders. These murders took place on April 1st, 1968 in the small farm town of Milan, Ohio. Population at the time was right around 1,300. A very rural area, just outside my hometown of Norwalk. I've never heard of this case before until I started researching it. It's just kind of interesting case I wanted to share with you guys. So, and this is an unsolved case for 54 years now. Let's get right into it. So who are the Cassidys? The Cassidys, by all accounts, were very loved by the community. The couple was reported to be a very happy-go-lucky couple. Anytime they were in public, they were affectionate. You know, just a nice family, ordinary family. The family consisted of 41-year-old William, 37-year-old Anne, 12-year-old Paddy, and 17-year-old Michael, who was a senior in high school at the time. Now, on this evening of April 1st, 1968, Michael had been working at a local bar that he cleaned in the evenings. The name of this bar was Andy and Willie's, and it was in Huron, which was approximately 7 miles from the family home. On that evening, Michael clocks into work at 10:05 p.m., works out his shift. He's seen by other co-workers. He clocks out at 3:05 a.m. From there, he leaves and goes to a nearby gas station on his way home from work, where he is seen during the time of 3:20 and 3:30 a.m. Michael arrives home right around 4 a.m., it is reported, and he is greeted by his dog Maggie, who appears to have some sort of injury to her hind leg. She's limping, and she just seems absolutely terrified. The vet that later looked at Maggie said she seemed to be terrified to death, just totally shooken up. So Michael enters the home, and as he typically did, he would go in and let his parents know, hey, I made it home. He enters the parents' bedroom, and he is greeted by an incredibly gruesome and shocking scene. His father, William, lie in the bed, still asleep at the time of his attack. He had been shot in the left side of the face with a shotgun and once in the chest. Ann Cassidy had been shot in the face one time. Ann actually was still alive at the time that Michael arrived home. He then goes over to 12-year-old Paddy's room to check on her, and he finds her in the same condition. I think initially, you know, from the shock, he couldn't tell the extent of her injuries or whether she was shot or not. But so after that, Michael leaves and he goes to an ex-girlfriend's house, and this is where he calls the sheriff's department. He makes the call to the sheriff's department at 4:04 a.m. Now, immediately they question Michael, obviously, because, you know, he was the, I don't want to say suspect, he was the only person of interest, I will say, at the time, because it did not appear that there was any forced entry into the home. Another odd detail is it didn't appear that the family had any defensive wounds. So you would think if they came in and shot Mr. Cassidy, that Mrs. Cassidy would awaken and begin to fight, but it didn't appear that way. Young Paddy's injuries were, she was not shot. It turns out that she was beaten about the head, the shoulders, and the chest area, and it looked like maybe with the butt of the shotgun. She was immediately taken to the hospital, and she underwent 5 hours of brain surgery and 97 sutures to close up some injuries on her head. Mrs. Cassidy was also still alive and taken to the hospital, where approximately an hour after she arrived at the hospital, she passed away. So the investigation begins, and, you know, this is 1968. It's not 2022 where, you know, within minutes the crime scene unit is there. It actually took the crime scene unit almost 2 solid days to even arrive at the scene and begin to investigate. Now, one thing they noticed with Michael, after talking to some witnesses that, you know, claimed to have seen him at the gas station and his co-workers, was that Michael was wearing a different outfit than he was seen earlier in. Now, the clothes that he was wearing earlier in the evening, I couldn't find anything where they had located those clothes. There was just nothing said about it. Now, the murder weapon that they believed was used was actually a shotgun that the Cassidy family owned. They kept, now remember, this is 1968, different times, okay? We wouldn't do this today, but 1968, the Cassidy family kept a loaded shotgun on their back porch, just leaning up against the back of their house in case they needed it. Wasn't uncommon back then, but this shotgun was missing, and this is what they believe was used in the murders. Now, they found only 1 shotgun shell at the house, and then the only other piece of evidence that they found at the house was a piece of the red plastic, I think, from the shotgun shell. Not sure what that's called, but they found that lying next to the bed in Mr. and Mrs. Cassidy's bedroom. So they continue on with this investigation, and they're just not coming up with anything. Now, I'm going to tell you one thing that they thought initially was a very big piece of evidence, which was a book that was found lying on the coffee table in the Cassidy family home. This was a book by Truman Capote that was written in the 50s and published later in the 50s, early 60s. And this book was called In Cold Blood. Now, one report I read said it really made a big deal about this book. And I think initially they thought that it was going to be more connected than it turned out that it was. They said that there was some similarities in the book to the murders, and there was actually a movie out at the time called In Cold Blood. So all the sheriff guys got together and they were like, let's go watch this movie and, you know, see for ourselves. So after watching the movie, the sheriff's department determined that wasn't really, you know, any kind of connection there. So that was kind of, you know, kind of fizzled out. So it, you know, there really wasn't a whole lot to go on here. Michael ended up taking a polygraph test that was witnessed by family members and some of the sheriffs that worked there, and he did pass the polygraph test. Also, another theory that they looked into was because the Cassidy family home was so near to the Turnpike exit, Ohio Turnpike exit, that possibly a drifter came off the turnpike, committed the murders, and then hopped on the turnpike, never to be seen again. Another theory was that a drifter came off of the railroad. The railroad also ran very near to the family home. Now, nothing ever came of either Michael's interrogations or questioning. Nothing ever came of the drifter theory. Like I said, this case has been unsolved for 54 years, and I would imagine in the small town of Milan that this is probably the biggest murder that they've had probably in history, and it weighs very heavy on this police department. And, you know, I've seen interviews with the current sheriff, and he talks about how he thinks that somebody in this community knows something. Whether they, you know, seen something that was out of character, maybe someone in town that wasn't a local and just kind of stood out to them, or someone that was acting different, or, you know, something. They just believe that this is how this case is going to get solved, by somebody speaking up, whether they think it's important or not. They're asking that you call and you give a tip. I'm going to leave a couple numbers down here for you. If you know anything, please call and give them your tips, because anything helps, and you can stay anonymous. You don't have to give your name. So that is the conclusion of this case. Unfortunately, I wish I could tell you it was solved, and hopefully someday I can come back and give you this great update that they got this guy, girl, whoever, and it's solved. But until then, I will keep you guys updated if there's any changes, and I will see you on my next video, guys. Thanks for joining me. Bye.